Hi, my name is Todd. I feel like I haven't talked for a while, so just as a reminder, my name is Todd. I work at the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon in the Jade District. And I guess to kind of illustrate, a lot of these discussions kind of talk about these big momentous events, and that's certainly part of the fabric, but it also, I think the story of gentrification and displacement also takes the form of small decisions, small events, a business going out of not having enough customers, the cost of living being too high for certain folks, and so that goes to that idea of housing as a human right. So I guess I think folks have. How many folks are familiar with Southeast Division Street? Yeah. Okay. How many folks have been here for longer than let's say 5 years? Okay. How many folks have seen the difference between let's see 20th in Division, 39th in Division, and how different that has changed, right? It's like those are all small kind of decisions of one business deciding to leave, deciding to sell, a developer coming and saying I'm going to build this, and then that kind of shapes a neighborhood as a whole. And so I want to illustrate the picture of how that's playing out in our communities today. There's an apartment complex in our neighborhood, which is actually right next to a community garden that we helped put in. It's called, I won't name the name of it. Folks will probably find it if they look hard enough. But
name it.
well, actually, I'm kind of intentionally doing it doesn't always, more publicity doesn't always help tenants. So, but those folks, it was a very diverse group of immigrant, mostly Chinese immigrant families. And it's a really solid community. It's very low income housing. A lot of these folks, at the neighborhood school, they were at 88% free and reduced lunch at the school. And so you have this community that's low income, very vulnerable to some of those pressures, and they rely on each other for navigating the systems of government, childcare, you name it. They're very solid as a community, and they talk to each other, they all know what's going on and help each other out. And this property actually was up for funding for affordable housing to become permanent affordable housing. Rose CDC was working on developing it. And through policy decisions and a panel that was making investments, that project unfortunately was not funded. And I think it was a perfectly rational decision by that panel. But at the same time, it basically boils down to creating new units of housing, building a new house or new housing development from the ground up is cheaper than doing a rehab. You can do X number of units or you can do Y number of units. So why don't we do the one that creates more? But what that analysis doesn't really take into account is the effect that that's going to have on that previously stable community. And so what happens? What happens right after that funding doesn't go through? The owner of the property says, well, I'm still selling the place. I'm trying to get rid of it in my real estate portfolio. So sure enough, less than a year later, we see this nameless, faceless California LLC purchase the property. And almost immediately, within a few months, the tenants are hearing that their utility bills are going up despite not having any rationalization for it. It's basically a rent increase in the guise of the utility increase. And they start seeing painting, they start seeing landscaping done, not addressing some of the more core housing issues like mold and some of the health factors that folks have seen. And so, yeah, and then that's increased their housing costs by, it varies depending on the unit, but I mean, they're really significant increases. They're 50 to 100% rent increases over a short period of time. And so that's like a story that, I don't think I could actually come up with a perfect microcosm of how private markets and policy decisions can really impact communities on the ground. Because now those families are all under threat of displacement. We're actually, and I think we'll talk about kind of how building community resilience. But we're working on organizing those tenants there to try and find a way for them to keep them in that neighborhood. So I guess that was kind of my story about how these things play out in our neighborhoods. And that's just one apartment building. and not every place is going to have a development that has an affordable housing developer that's like willing to put those resources in. So I think, as an organization, we're really trying to tackle that issue and hear those stories and work towards supporting those families that kind of fall into those same patterns. So, yeah, I think it's just really relevant to think about how our everyday actions and perfectly rational decisions can really perpetuate a lot of these systems of racism and oppression. So, yeah.
I'll just add something really quick and pass it on. We've also been working with folks in the Cully neighborhood and also in North Portland around some evictions. And I think the reality is that it not only impacts housing, it impacts education because it disrupts school communities, it disrupts those relationships, it disrupts whole communities. And so, and as gentrification happens, as communities get pushed out, then the services that the community has responded to in building up to support bilingual education or other educational support programs, very often culturally specific ones, they have to start somewhere else new. And it takes time to build a robust program that is going to be responsive in the way communities need. And so it's housing, but it's housing plus.
My neighborhood, I live in Selwood. In 2015, the state legislature overturned what had been a long-standing ban on a tool called inclusionary zoning. So inclusionary zoning says that if you build an apartment with 10 units in a neighborhood that had a certain median family income, you had to provide a certain percentage of those new units at or way significantly below, sometimes 60, sometimes 80% of the median family income in that neighborhood. So it wasn't the answer, but it was one tool to help create communities that weren't fully displaced, weren't fully gentrified. The residents could still afford some of the units that remained. And so the housing lobby pushed again and again and again. Opal Environmental Justice was one of the organizations that took a lead on trying to overturn this ban. It was us in Texas, like good company, right? That had this ban. So finally, in 2015, the ban was overturned, and then the city of Portland implemented adopted its own policy. It needs a lot of work. It's only affordability is considered 80% of median family income, which is like $60,000. It's not exactly like, it needs some work. But there are 3 units going in Selwood right now that have adopted this inclusionary zoning idea. So there are percentages of these units that are going to be available for 80 to 60% of median family income residents. The way that they have worked it so they could build the majority of units is that they've gotten certain, they have asked for, not yet gotten, but have asked for certain leniency around parking, the amount of parking that could be allowed. Okay? If you could be on my neighborhood listserv right now. And so it's the type of thing where we are all about transportation options and alternatives and taking public transit and biking and all of that. But then it gets into a neighborhood where it means that you're not going to have as much parking and it means affordable housing. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen to the neighborhood? That's the biggest outcry that I have seen on our neighborhood listserv in years. So it's this coded thing of like, well, it's not that we're against affordable housing. It's just that we want to be able to park our cars. So, you know, when people talk about the policies, the little policies, that's one of the ways in which some of the supposed advancements are being blocked. Oh, we need more parking in the neighborhood. So.
I think one of the things we talked about when we met to prepare was the Rockwood neighborhood and what's happening in Rockwood. And especially in terms of concerns about secondary displacement, and you folks want to talk about that. And because it's so near to where we are right now. I'll just say no.
I don't know what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, I think.
I strive to be trauma informed.
Well, I think, you know, there is and has been so much concern about the lack of resources in East County and the rush to provide those resources. And folks have, you know, I think government is being responsible. At the same time, already Rockwood is becoming unaffordable for a lot of the families out there. So it's like, how much further east are communities going to be pushed out? And when does it stop? And the reality is, people need to live where it's affordable. So we need to be responsible to create affordable housing. And I just have to echo, like, affordable housing isn't terribly affordable.
Yeah.
You know, and it's particularly not affordable if you're struggling, if you're low income. And so in a few minutes when we talk about community responses, you know, I'll share some of what our community responses are. But yes, I mean, I think it's, you know, one of the things that we didn't cover earlier, which we had hoped to, and you know, this might be like the whole room discussion, is like, at what points could different decisions have been made? You know, because I think we have to put ourselves in that frame of mind, otherwise we're going to make the same mistakes and challenging that. So,
I think we also talked about here's the federal actions, the current climate and white nationalism. I think another thing to point out is this is one way this has impacted our communities is speaking of like certain immigration policies, like a travel ban, for example, have really scared a lot of folks in our community, and it complicates the relationship between the advocacy that we do on things like housing and direct response to threats that folks are receiving. And so I think I shared this in our discussion, that we lost some volunteers from our organization and from our panel because there's this discussion about, like, why are we talking about housing when folks are scared to leave their house and, you know, scared to go out in public. And I think we're really sensitive to that issue, or to both of those issues. But I think it really speaks to the idea that, you know, when we talk about housing as a human right, the threats are coming from a lot of different places. And, I think just it's important that we really work on all of them. But that's also how the kind of current political climate has impacted our community as well.
you know, I think our communities are responding the way they've always responded. And that is first and foremost practically. They have families to feed, they have children to raise, they have to go to work in order to survive, and so first and foremost, they respond practically. Sometimes, like all of those in crisis, they respond chaotically or seemingly chaotically to the outside world, but it makes sense in the crisis there. And that often gets judged, you know, why can't people bring in all the paperwork when they're signing up for family stability, you know, housing money? Well, you know, when you're living in a chaotic world, it's hard to pull all that together. So I think also, you know, at times folks are responding in ways that the larger society isn't comfortable with. And we, as folks that are helping families and individuals get stable, we have to get comfortable with that. So again, also in our community, our immigrant community, because more and more our Latino community is growing, it's extremely young, and but a lot of them are citizens. So that's increasingly the reality of our folks. There's still a lot of low income, some not as great of educational attainment as we would like for our community. But for our immigrant community, our families are also used to, and in the current political climate, even more so, hiding. One of the ways that folks maneuver around the affordability issue that's really culturally appropriate and comfortable, but also practically necessary when you're low income, is that we tend to have multiple families in one unit, and that really gets us in trouble with the housing rules. So I think we need to shift some of those housing rules. Also, it's often necessary because maybe one of those family members has a social security number, but others don't. And so they will, you know, put the family member with the application with the social security number on there. And just the necessity of multiple wages in order to pay the rent. Also think that, you know, returning to the notion of housing as a human right, the concept of home is really like at core how do we define ourselves, and even as we migrate, whether it's forced migration through economic forced migration or through violence, I think individuals or, you know, or families maybe, they really, having that sense of home and carrying it to the new place is really important. And we see that with families in Rockwood. They create home where they are, you know, so they'll bring those elements of home, and then that spreads out to the community. And so for our Latino community, Rockwood feels like home. You know, it's, for all of the lack of resources, it is home. And we had to, in another program, not family stability, we had to move out of family for safety reasons. And I was talking with this mom, and you know, her new housing in Clackamas was safe and secure, and she's like, I miss Rockwood. It's community for me. So I think we also need to think about the sense of community that people build, and those relationships they build with each other. And I do think she was talking about the Latino community, but I think she was also talking about the broader community in Rockwood and the connections that they have made. In the current political climate, you know, it's harder. We are having a harder time facing families. We're being more and more asked about, you know, families are being more and more asked for the social security numbers. We're also seeing allies. We've had some landlords call our family stability program and say, just so you know, we don't ask. So I think that's important. It's important to highlight those positive things as well.
One thing I want to point out from the outset, one thing I'm really proud of, you know, being a staff member of Apado, and working with awesome board members that are in the room right now, married. Hi. One of our core principles is, you know, we stand in solidarity with other communities of color. So all the issues that impact the communities in Coley, North Portland, anywhere in Portland, you know, those are issues that we also know impact our communities and folks. So, but that being said, in our particular neighborhood, in the J District, we take a comprehensive approach to anti-displacement work. Housing is one component, one critical component of the work that we do in Southeast Portland. The J District mission, you know, we've kind of identified 4 priority strategies. Housing is one of them, transportation justice, parks and green space, and then small business development. Because, you know, even if you have, I mean, I think this is something like in terms of the gentrification displacement thing, even if you have residents that have the ability to have housing there, businesses that serve those folks in a culturally specific way or in a way that makes them feel like they're at home, if those businesses get displaced, then the residents are going to follow not long afterwards. And vice versa. If the residents are priced out, then those culturally specific businesses and places that have been around for years and years, follow just along with those residents. So we look at these things as all interconnected, and we really try to address them as much as we can as a system. So in terms of like specific programs, I think I mentioned the tenant organizing with that development that I mentioned earlier. One of the things that Apano has really taken the lead on is organizing the tenants and actually getting them help from legal counsel and trying to negotiate more favorable terms for themselves as tenants. I think we've made some progress on that. I don't want to talk too much about it, but that work is still ongoing, and we're trying to connect folks with permanent affordable housing in the neighborhood. We're also really proud this Rose CDC is working on a development of affordable housing on the corner of 82nd Division, and trying to make sure that folks in our neighborhood have the first crack at applying for that. No matter what language they speak or background they're coming from, we want folks in our neighborhood to at least know about it and have the opportunity to apply and be considered for that housing. I think those are pretty much our biggest ones related to housing. But like I said, I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask you a question because I know that Apano, or I've read that Apano is either a member of anti-displacement PDX and right to the city. Can you talk about those? Do you have any information of what that looks like?
So anti-displacement PDX, I think they're a little dormant right now. It was in response to policy issues that were affecting the Portland Comprehensive Plan. And so I know we had gotten together with a lot of other community organizations to try and fight for policies like things like inclusionary zoning and things like affordable housing investments in East Portland and in places in Portland that really need those investments. So they came up with an 11-point plan. I cannot remember most of them offhand. I think if you looked it up online, you'd be able to find those 11 policy points that would really go a long way to helping mitigate the displacement in Portland. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you mind talking a little bit about the housing bond as well, or just sort of what the framework? Because I know Kristen was talking about how inclusionary zoning mainly serves folks who are at 60 to 80% of the median income, which is, I think we're saying about $60,000 a year. Do you know this is the bond targeted? Yeah, I don't know the answer. So I can give folks an update. Folks remember the Yes for Affordable Homes campaign last November, which thankfully passed. So right now, the city is working on implementing the funding. So it's $258 million that's going to be invested in affordable housing. There's a stakeholder advisory committee that's getting together to determine policies around how those investments will be made. I don't think there's any final decisions that have been made. But then I'm serving, and I think I saw Alan here. I don't know if he left, but Alan, sorry? He's coming back.
Oh, he's coming back, but he's also he's on the oversight committee. He's one of the 5 folks. I'm one, along with Jess Larson, Stephen, and then one other that I can't remember offhand. But the city is really working hard to try and make sure those investments are done in a great and equitable way. I think I'm sure there will be some pushback, and we have some progress to make on how those investments will be made. But I know, I think there's some legal questions at this stage about how things can be, like how those investments can be leveraged. But right now, my understanding is PHB has to own the housing, so it will be city-owned housing. But I think a lot of those things are being developed right now. For example, with this housing bond, one of the questions that one of the guiding principles that we want to make effective and efficient investments, right? You don't want to spend $300,000 a unit if you can do the same thing for less money or half the cost. And so one thing is like, where do you invest those affordable housing dollars? Do you invest it in East Portland, which has been, it's been underinvested in, it's still somewhat affordable, and you can prevent displacement, or you would attempt to promote displacement, or prevent displacement? Or do you build it farther in, or where land is more expensive, that the neighbors are, and you can create some more mixed income type communities, but you might face some pushback? And I guess that's a question that I struggle with, is how do you best make those investments? Because folks that are
making median income deserve to have the same nice public investments in parks and schools that every other community deserves to have. But at the same time, we also need to invest where the money has not flowed in the past. So those are tensions that we struggle with on a daily basis. And if folks have thoughts about that, I'd love to chat about it when they're here after the program.
So I'm going to add a couple of things, and in particular, so I like what you said, Alice, earlier, that we have to really focus on making sure that folks that are most impacted by displacement are the ones that, and historically impacted by the displacement, are the ones that are leading the work and who has a meaningful voice in the policies, any policies that are going to be made in the future around how we deal with this issue. Because we know also now the gentrifiers are being gentrified, like the first and second wave gentrifiers are now finding that they're not able to live in some of these areas too. So we have to be careful about who, when we talk about folks who have been displaced, who are we going to center in this work? And also I was asked to kind of talk about also the violence that, so when I talk about the history from a Black experience in Oregon, in Portland in particular, I'm usually doing this, or I used to do this, from a perspective of domestic violence, because that's where I had worked. And so I always try to link like state violence and the impacts of how that impacts interpersonal relationship violence. And because in the community there's higher rates of, in the Black community, higher rates of lethality, higher rates of severe IPD, and they're directly linked, it's directly linked to class, right? And so when you're looking at communities, and I had written down some figures, where income fell for Black folks $35,000, so it's below $30,000, and for whites it increased. And so this is from 2000 and 2013. It fell $35,000 below $30,000, and it rose for white folks $55,000 to $60,000, right? So when you think about how intentional, like when the recessions and everything that has happened, it impacts communities of color first and most vulnerable folks in the communities, and it has an impact on whether folks are how they can achieve safety, right? And so in the work that I did, a lot of the folks who had experienced interpersonal violence were also houseless and trying to flee and finding safety for themselves and or their children. And then that also brings in a lot of other institutional violence, be it the threat of having their children removed, not being able to find employment, entanglements with law, and so I think that it's really important to keep in mind, like when we're talking about how it looks on an individual level, that it's not only just racial, it's gendered, and a lot of these who gets safety depends on race, depends on whether your family is heteronormative or not, right? A lot of times, and so it's really important that how houselessness and displacement really impacts people, impacts safety at an individual level as well. And I want to say that these policies have been made, right? These were intentional policies, and we know this. And they can be unmade, right? And so this is where I just want to, you know, to bring it into resilience, like we can undo this. We can do, we can decolonize, right? What is happening here, and so.
Oh, absolutely.
I just wanted to add one thing that I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but I think the other thing is that our community is dealing with that is with the current situation is, you know, as important as housing is, like right now, our communities are really, they're thinking about their children. So right now we have this extra layer of work, which is helping families make a plan for if they're detained and deported. And so we're doing that on top of whatever other work we do. And the way it looks, you know, with the folks who are working with families on housing is, like, those are really trusted individuals because they've already been working with them. And so part of that is like, you know, do you have a plan? And I will just say, most of the time they come to us and say, what do I do with my, they're asking us as an organization, what do you take my children? And so we're working on different strategies around that with other partners, but in the meantime, really helping families make individual crisis plans around that. And that is the first step, because a lot of these families have been here for a long time. They have developed some assets. They have bank accounts. They have homes, some of them, that they've worked really hard for over the years. And so the next thing is like helping them make a plan to protect their assets. Because otherwise the banks are just going to end up with that money that they sweated for years and years and years.
Well, I feel good. Real quick, I just wanted to highlight sort of another intersection in terms of services, and that's transportation, and how transportation options have affected communities that have been displaced. So all high school students in Portland Public Schools they can ride the bus for free as much as they want. They can go all over the city if they have a student ID. That didn't follow students that were displaced. So in Reynolds and David Douglas and in Park Rose, they don't get the same benefit that Portland Public School students, high school students, get. So that's one aspect of TriMet that needs to change. The transportation options have not followed the population growth. So in terms of trying to get, you know, from one part of the city going north or south, you almost always have to go all the way to downtown Portland, then go north or south, and then come back out. So the transportation options have not kept up. And I really wanted to specifically highlight one thing that's going on right now. Alice mentioned these policies were made intentionally. There is an intentional policy right now that TriMet is considering, and that is they're considering, there was a budget meeting this morning at 9 a.m. They're considering spending $11 million on what they don't call it this, but I don't understand how it could be anything less. They're calling it's basically a transit jail.
Yes.
So if you get caught for not paying your fare, they could put you into this new $11 million transit facility to question you, interrogate you. So if you didn't get $2.50 for the quarters coming out of your house in the morning, later on that day you could be in jail. So that exact amount of money, $11 million, instead of spending it on a jail, that is almost exactly the amount of money that would be necessary to implement a citywide low-income fare. So instead of implementing a citywide low-income fare, they're instead planning on building a jail. So to the extent to which we have the power all these times the city went this way when it should have gone that way, we have the power right now to decide on one of those decisions. So to the extent to which you can contact
So if we were going to organize our people to write letters, who would we write them to? Or phone
to the
calls?
TriMet Board of Directors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also,
Also,
there's-
appointed by the governor also, so there, that's another point of pressure that for TriMet.
Also, Opal is an amazing group, grassroots, and predominantly folks of color, all.
One person on the board.
Who is actually doing the work around transportation, is also involved in Because making those connections, you know, food safety, food health, because also there's a lack of there's food scarcity in a lot of these areas, and also they're involved in anti-displacement as well. So they do some amazing work, and I think that they should get some props to it.
I live in Kenton, where the our Kenton Neighborhood Association just very narrowly voted to have a pilot housing project for the temporary shelter for women. It'll be, you know, it's in the neighborhood, and personally, I'm really excited about it. But I guess this is probably too big of a question, but just something for us to think about. I'm curious what you all think. A lot of the comments at that meeting, I mean, it really passed by only a few votes. And on the Kenton Neighborhood Association Facebook page were kind of the nature of, I think, I care about people without homes, particularly women, but I'm afraid how this is going to impact my neighborhood, and crime is going to increase, and, you know, all these bad things are going to happen. I want this to happen, I just don't think that Kenton is the right place. So I'm wondering, how can we work together? I don't know if it's like, how do we build a public awareness around humanizing people without homes, so that not in my backyard phenomenon, you know, it's couched in this like well-meaning, I care, but it's better somewhere else. And I guess I just can't figure out where that somewhere else is. And how can we, I don't know, shift the thinking of people who may have good intentions but are misguided to, I don't know, care and see people without homes as humans.
Well, I don't have the answer.
Well, it's kind of rhetorical, I guess. I don't know.
The same thing is happening in my neighborhood, where Transitions Project went in with the climate shelter along Milwaukee, and the neighborhood was initially quite like, here, have some towels and that kind of stuff, and now they're very upset that people stand on the street after they wake up in the morning and they smoke cigarettes, like as if passing somebody smoking a cigarette is more oppressive than being without a home, you know, a home. It's the same thing happening. There's a new mental health facility that's attempting to open up in Washington County, and it was as if an atomic bomb was being proposed to drop on that community. The only thing that I have found, and this is within my own neighborhood, is just facts. Again, there are the stories, the qualitative stories, but saying like, okay, well, this is the number of people in our community who are homeless. So what else are we going to do? And putting the onus back on them to sort of say, you know, they're in our community, and that's the reality of the community. So if there's another answer, then you do it. Instead of complaining about all of it, there's one option. But again, I don't know if that's the whole answer or even any of the answer. Maybe I'm just antagonizing people more.
This may be really simplistic, but I think it's back to that like wealth going up, you know, and it's simplistic in that like, what's the first thing we learn in kindergarten, you know, is to share. And I think it's like willing to be inconvenienced, you know, like we do not want to be inconvenienced. And I get it, like homelessness and so many other things, it's complicated and it doesn't always look pretty. But there are answers, and some of that answer is like, what do we do immediately in our neighborhood? But then also, what do we do to like change those policies that get some of the money moving down to, you know, whether it's like better resources for mental health, better resources for affordable housing. You know, it's complex, and you guys are all doing the work, you know, and it's hard work. I mean, one of the things that we said we were going to talk about, which we didn't. But it's like, it's hard work, and we also have to take care of ourselves doing it, because we're going to burn out if we don't. So, and we might burn out temporarily and come back because we're passionate about it, but it's really important because it's not something we're going to fix from here to tomorrow, but we have to start somewhere.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that like concentrated wealth, right? It's like, you know, it's the story of the project, right? It's like, well, it's not in my backyard. So it creates, I think it's important to call it out for what it is, which is perpetuating a system of racism, of oppression that is basically saying like that approach of like, well, just not in my backyard really does produce the
the outcomes that I don't think anybody wants. Like when we talk about income disparities and the impacts on health outcomes of income disparities, I think those, like, I wish I had a better handle on like the benefits of having mixed income neighborhoods. But I think we know that, I think I can make a general statement that the health outcomes are better for everybody involved when you have less class, less income segregation. So I think talking, like maybe presenting it in that sense that like it's better for you, it's better for everybody if we get out of that paradigm of it's me or them. There's really, the book that I feel like helped me was this book called Our Kids. I can't remember the name of the author. Does anybody remember? It's the Bowling Alone guy.
Oh, Robert Putnam.
Yeah, Robert Putnam. So Our Kids by Robert Putnam really talked about, you know, it's changing that paradigm of thinking it's like my kids and those kids, and thinking about it as they're our kids. And how do we fight that? It's cool as long as it's not in my backyard. And, yeah, I think that's super insidious because I think we all feel it. We all feel that like parking lot, like why is there no parking here? Like we all feel that, like, you know, like if somebody were parked in front of the house that I live in,
This is my house.
yeah, let's go on. So I mean, I think we can feel that and appreciate that, but still try and step above that and think like have this message of, yeah, no, it's like there are some inconveniences that we should welcome.
Okay, I said I was one last advocacy pitch. Okay, one last advocacy pitch. In terms of housing, there is another piece of legislation in front of the legislature right now, HB 2004, and that would address a couple of different things. One is we are one of the few jurisdictions that don't allow for rent control. So it would overturn the ban on rent control. It would provide certain stipulations for landlords that they would have to follow to proceed with any eviction. It would end no cause eviction. So you're doing everything right. They can't evict you unless under very specific circumstances. So again, another plug for being active in that.
More general advocacy plugging. Pressure on your local government. I mean, I feel like at the county, at Metro, at the city of Portland, city of Gresham, you name it, like I'm just kind of kicking that idea of like, you know, what are we doing in East Portland? And I think from our experience in the J District and on East 2nd Division, we're working on that affordable housing development. Land control is such a huge issue. There's no resources for us to like have actual like control over land to make sure it turns into some sort of like mixed income or affordable housing development rather than, you know, another self-storage unit or a McDonald's or any number of kind of for-profit enterprises. And I'm not saying that there's not, like there's definitely that room for economic development. We actually want to do economic development in our neighborhoods, like helping the small businesses improve and raise the tide for everybody. But from the community-based advocacy group, we see these, and I would say, you know, the J District is one of a few programs that are doing anti-displacement work in Portland. In places like Tully, there's these really key community locations that dominoes have to fall in the right way for us to have any influence whatsoever on those really key locations. So putting advocacy at your city councilors, at your county councilors, or commissioners, commissioners. Yeah, it really helps. I think when we know that the city buys something or Metro buys something, it gives us a much bigger leverage, like much more leverage to put pressure on them because it's for the public. It's not for just straight up profit and building something to be as profitable as possible. So that's my plug. We can get land trusts. We can invest in arts and public goods for folks that need it.
Well, thanks everyone.